Welcome to the Wacky World of Work. I'm James Tehrani, your host. Today on the program we have Greg Moran, the president and CEO of the newly formed predictive talent analytics company OutMatch, which was formed after Check.com and Assess Systems came together. Welcome to the program, Greg.
Thanks for having me. Glad to be here, James.
All right, well, first, let's start off. Tell me a little bit about the company, and was this a merger or an acquisition?
Yeah, it was really a merger. So, two companies that came together. It was basically, it's kind of a love story, right? So my previous company that we started back in around 2009 was called Check.com. Really started doing predictive talent selection and really data-driven hiring and selection primarily for large, highly distributed organizations. So a lot of retailers, restaurants, hospitality, sales organizations, things like that. Got to know the team at Assess a while ago, and they were very complementary in terms of their product suite and our product suite and our markets. And, after about 18 months or so, really, merged the two organizations with the backing of one of the top VC firms out in Silicon Valley, which is actually where I'm sitting today in a beautiful hotel room, with my nice decor here.
I see it in the back. Oh, wait.
That's right.
So tell me a little bit about the challenges of merging these two companies. And did the CEO of Assess Systems, Stephen Sasser, come over as well?
Yeah. So basically, everybody came over as part of the deal, which was great. And really, merging two organizations like this is always a fun challenge. And I can honestly say I've been through this before, and this has been just a terrific experience. I mean, one of the things that was really attractive to us about the opportunity was the cultures were so, they complemented each other really well, and the teams just legitimately got along. And even going back before the deal was actually closed, there was just a really good working chemistry, and that's continued on, and that really makes something like this that much easier. The hardest part of any merger like this is getting the cultures to mesh, right? And
so that's one thing I wanted to talk about, the cultures meshing. How did you go about doing that, and what were some of the challenges?
Yeah, so it helped an awful lot that the teams really stayed intact. Steve, who you just mentioned as the previous CEO of Assess, was really instrumental in kind of bringing that team through. The whole leadership team at Assess stayed on, as well as the leadership team. Check was much smaller, so we had a much smaller leadership team, and we were able to kind of keep those teams intact. So, in a lot of ways, this was really just tremendous upside for everybody, right? We had fresh capital, we really had kind of fresh thinking coming in on both sides, and and really the opportunity to do something in a really big way. And because we were both focused on the same client base, right, of like I mentioned, retail, restaurant, hospitality, sales, we were both dealing with sort of the same issues with our clients and really sort of focusing around the same solutions with our clients. So that made it that much easier. But the culture side was really about, getting people aligned around that shared vision and, of really being the leading player in data-driven talent management.
Okay, great. So let's talk a little bit about analytics. How can companies use analytics to their advantage? And you've mentioned some big organizations, but can small organizations latch on to analytics too?
Absolutely. When you talk about the term analytics, it's really wide, right? And, analytics can mean an awful lot of different things. And I think every company that's doing and again, I'm just kind of thinking about this in the hiring context, right? But any company that's doing any kind of hiring at all is always collecting data. You're always figuring out pieces of why does one person work within your organization and why does somebody else maybe not work out, right? Every time you make a successful hire or you make an unsuccessful hire, you collect a piece of data. And that data goes into your overall analytics, right? So I think one of the challenges that I see companies making, and this is particularly true, well, I guess it's really true, but whether they're large or small companies, is thinking about analytics from more of like a big data perspective, right? Like we've got to have, 100,000 data points or 1 million data points or 10 million data points before it becomes meaningful. I just don't believe that. You can start simple, right? Just by analyzing every single hire that you're making. Even if you're just a hiring manager within the organization, you're making, 10 hires a year, going back and really looking at who succeeded, who didn't, why did they succeed, Why didn't somebody else succeed? Looking at it on a skill basis, on a competency basis, that's analytics,
Yeah.
right? I mean, just that alone is analytics, and you can really just start with that. And then obviously you can get more and more sophisticated over time, but start simple.
So as the CEO of an analytics company, do you use it in your own, is OutMatch using it?
Sure. I mean, look, we're just like anybody else, right? We make the same mistakes that everybody else does, and we try to at least be more cognizant of these things because we deal with it every day, right? We have the added advantage of talking to our clients about, using analytics and data in the hiring process. So, sure, when we make hires, being very data driven in that process, we obviously, we have the tools to use, we use them, right? Our hiring process is really data driven. Our leadership development process is really data driven because, again, we have the tools, right? So we're constantly looking at why somebody succeeds in our culture and in any particular job, and being able to then look at how we hire in the future against that model, right? So we're using it in that sense. We're using it in the sense of pulling in additional performance data, right? Now, what makes somebody stay with us over the long term, or what makes somebody maybe, want to look outside the organization for other opportunities? And we're pulling in that data to try to retain people and develop people.
Is it a concern about misinterpreting the data?
I think there's always a concern about misinterpreting data. I think at the end of the day, we collect data, but we need to make sort of human judgments about that, right?
Right.
And in terms of what's important and what's not important, and what we're going to choose to ignore and what we're going to choose to focus on. Signal versus noise is always a big issue, right? Even in a company our size and 100 employees or something like that, there's still an awful lot of noise that enters in, and trying to figure out where that signal is, certainly can lead to errors in the way that we interpret that data. But I think, if you're consistent about what you're collecting and you're consistent about applying it, and you're really focusing at sort of the bare bones, like I mentioned, gave you those, sort of easy examples to start with.
Sure.
I think that really helps just make your judgments and make how you're interpreting data just a little bit easier over time. It's when you get into really big complex things that you're adding more noise to the spectrum, and you can then human interpretation can really pose a problem if you don't have the system set up to back it up.
Great. Well, thank you so much for joining me today, and for you joining me on the Wacky World of Work. I'd like to thank my guest, OutMatch's Greg Moran. If you have a question about the program, you can get in touch with me via editors@workforce.com, or you can tweet to me at @WorkforceJames. Until next time, like I always say, whatever works.